All right, today we're at the Air Force Museum around Dayton, and it's one of the world's largest Air Force museum. It's actually like 3 hangars, so we're gonna go inside and check it out. And I'm talking to you now because we have to put masks once we get closer to the building, so I'll see you guys inside. All right, so the very first part of the museum is the birth of flight with the Wright brothers, and you kind of have some of the developmental planes, which are obviously from Dayton, which is really interesting. From there it goes into the planes right before World War I, leading up to World War I. So you have those biplane, triplane development, which is really interesting because literally in 10 years they just really supersede the technology of the Wright brothers. You get into this first kind of flying bomb airplane, which is interesting. You know, who would have thought they kind of had pre-mechanical drones at that point. From there it goes right into leading up to World War II. So you get the metal planes, the first metal planes right before World War II. And from there, you know, you get they get away from the biplanes into the single plane design. Aircraft, all the different things. They cover briefly, obviously in World War II, there's a small segment on the Holocaust. There's a really nice segment of the air jackets, so you kind of see what they flew. They would kind of hand paint the jackets, which is really cool, and sew down their insignia. As well, from a painting perspective, they would paint on the planes the number of kills they had. They would do pinup girls on the planes. They did have a few planes. They have one air technology during the cold. They got some bombers here. Really interesting. You can kind of see a section that I didn't cover on the women of World War II, the Tuskegee Airmen, which is the black airmen, which is really cool. You see some of the uniforms here. They had these really thick boots they had to wear too, because obviously it's really cold and high atmosphere. And those planes are like just literally paper thin metal. So where you get into a little bit of the propaganda spin of the Air Force was critical with the bombing. And if you study World War II, you kind of get the feel that maybe the Army controlling the physical land was more important than the Air Force, but it's always a debate between the Army and Air Force, who's supreme. And then right from there, you go from obviously post-World War, so you go to the 50s, going to Korea. And that leads into the 1960s. So you got Vietnam covered, as well as, you know, later right after that you have the Cold War. Again, I kind of skimmed through that. They have a really nice display from the helicopters. They have that new tech kind of developing. You got a MiG in there, so you have one of the Soviet planes. And not too much. It's probably the last Soviet thing they have in here as far as their development. You have some land vehicles. They had 2 cars in here for some reason. I don't know why. They just threw in a Mustang. It's like has nothing to do with the Air Force at all. It's like bad management, obviously. You have one of these massive bombers. So you can see these massive transports that they use now. They're just insane. You get to some of the stealth technology from the 1960s, which is really cool. And then later you go into the actual space race. It goes from the 60s, and I think they have up to the kind of the Challenger. And they have some of the ICBMs, which I was just shocked that I mean, obviously they're just a frame of the ICBM, but they actually have some of the ICBMs. They have the cockpit of Apollo 13 you can kind of climb into, so that's take your picture in there. And they have some of the astronaut suits that they use, so that's really cool. So, all right, so we just finished seeing the museum. There's a couple points I'd like to make. So up to World War I would say it's pretty accurate. It has both sides of the war. Partially this is due to the fact that during World War I, no side really took over one country or another. They kind of they fought a solid front where they couldn't break the front. It only moved like 100, 200 miles, basically a static front. So at the end of the war, there was warplanes on both sides of the war, and now we're 50, 60 years ahead, so it's not really political to show the other side. Once you get to World War II, it becomes more political. You don't have much. You don't have like 1 or 2 Japanese planes. You have 1 or 2 German planes. Germany could have been because they were bombed flat, but Japan, they probably had tons of stuff left over from the war because they nuked it twice, but you know, there was bases all over Japan, obviously, so there would have been quite a bit of aircraft. So it's interesting that they didn't have any of the more representation in the Japanese besides 2. I know they had the Zero, of course, and then maybe a Zero Part 2, but it would seem they would have had more. Again, once you get to the 60s onward, it's going to be completely all-American aircraft. Probably this is due to the fact, well, there are a couple MiGs here and there from Vietnam, but it's probably just due to the fact that you know, obviously Russia or China or other competing air forces aren't going to give away their airplanes for free. It'd only be if they got caught in battle. We happen to transport it back and put it back together. So there's a little bit limited. So probably 100 years from now, maybe it'll be more representational of those other air forces, but maybe not, because you know, national air forces tend to represent their own Air Force fleet. So maybe it might be 200-300 years, and they kind of do an international show at World War II, you know, and then kind of combine those Air Forces pieces maybe. But this is a really good museum. Really cool is they have some of the ICBMs, and you see kind of the Apollo 16 missions, and you can get inside that aircraft. I wasn't able to get as many photographs as I wanted to because time ran short. My wife wanted to leave, so but I had seen the museum before, so I wasn't crushed. I just went through and kind of shot really quickly, but it has really impressive. You can actually see some of the early missile developments, which is kind of shocking. I was really shocked to see that in there. I didn't think they would actually have that open to the public, but it is like 1960s tech versus today. They had some of the drones hovering above, which you'll see in the photos, so that's kind of interesting. But overall, it's a really nice museum. I would say definitely come with, you know, full stomach, come in good condition, because you're going to be walking. I think it's 4 full air hangars, so it's really huge. And yeah, I would recommend it, and it's free. It's obviously kind of a propaganda device to get people to join the Air Force. Surprise, surprise. But so that is that lint, and you get that feel after the 60s onward in that museum. But overall, I recommend it. Hopefully you guys go check it out. And that's my museum review of the day.